The moment we flip a switch, the current inside the wall trembles at a single frequency. America, 60 Hz. Europe, 50 Hz. We assume these numbers emerged from science. They did not. Standards are not born in conference rooms. They harden on the wreckage of war, bankruptcy, merger, and death. This difference in frequency was not a mere historical footnote. 2011. Fukushima. Eastern Japan faced a power shortage. The West had surplus, yet the current could not move. One side ran at 50 Hz, the other at 60. A standard locked in place over a century ago decided the fate of a modern city in darkness. The question is this: who set the frequency? The frequency was not decided in a laboratory. January 4, 1903, Coney Island, New York. A 3-ton elephant was fitted with wooden sandals threaded with copper electrodes. The switch came down. 6,600 volts. 10 seconds. Smoke rose. The elephant collapsed without a sound. Dead in under a minute. Edison Manufacturing Company had a camera on the scene. The execution became a 74-second film. 13 days later, it screened in theaters nationwide. The title? Electrocuting an Elephant. A death sold for a penny. A document of how ruthlessly the age of electricity was marketed through spectacle. The copyright was formally registered with the Library of Congress. Edison, Tesla, Westinghouse. None of them own the 60 Hz standard. April 15, 1892. A company was forced into existence. No inventor's name appeared in its title. Who collapsed? Who locked the chains over their ruins? Act 1. The 1-mile limit and 2 loops. September 4th, 1882. Pearl Street, Manhattan. Edison threw the switch. 59 households lit up. 110 volts, direct current. The wire reached 1 mile. That was the world's first modern commercial power station. That was also its limit. 1 mile was the limit. Direct current could not change voltage easily. The farther electricity travels, the more it bleeds away. To carry the same load at low voltage required thick, expensive copper wire. Raise the voltage, reduce the current. Reduce the current, cut the loss. Thin the wire. DC could not make that conversion. Every mile demanded a new power station. The bigger the city, the more stations needed, exponentially. Edison knew this. He did not care. 110 volts, direct current, 1 mile. Edison built the first link, but someone else would tighten it. That someone had not yet stepped onto the stage. The following year, 513 customers. By 1891, over 2,000 central power stations across America, 235,000 arc lights on city streets. That same year, Britain had 25 power stations. This was not a gap in technology. America was different. In Britain, the Electric Lighting Act of 1882 allowed local governments to forcibly acquire private power grids after 21 years, at scrap metal prices. The regulation meant to prevent monopoly killed the industry itself. In Germany, major banks sat directly on the boards of AEG and Siemens, coordinating standards through committee. Founders maintained control for decades, but America fought in the market. And the market swallowed the inventors. 1888. Nikola Tesla arrived with a different kind of loop, alternating current. With a transformer, voltage could be raised to tens of thousands of volts. At that voltage, a single thin wire could carry electricity for dozens of miles. No more power station every mile. The true weapon of AC was not the current itself. It was the transformer. The cost structure was entirely different. George Westinghouse bought Tesla's patents for $60,000, with additional royalties per unit sold. Westinghouse did not trust banks. He built his empire with his own money, his own way. He kept Wall Street's capital at arm's length. That distance would become the first crack that later destroyed him. Into Edison's camp came a different kind of force. J.P. Morgan backed Edison's company with capital. Morgan did not invent. He was a liquidator. one who consolidates fragmented chaos into a single structure. His language was not technology, it was governance. Here, a structural paradox took hold. When alternating current emerged, capital moved toward the technology that could cover more ground. That movement was not the outcome of engineering debate. Direct current cost too much copper. Cost decided the fate of technology, and that same structure pushed capital to open the door to madness. Act 2. The image war and the verdict of numbers. Two power orders collided on the same city streets. Edison declared alternating current dangerous. To prove it, he publicly electrocuted dogs, horses, and calves. Technology had become a tool for destroying a competitor's reputation. At the end of that logic, something else was waiting. August 6, 1890. Auburn Prison, New York. William Kemmler sat in the electric chair, convicted of murdering his girlfriend with an axe. The generator used for the execution bore one name: Westinghouse. Westinghouse had not sold that generator. Edison's side spent $5,000 to secretly obtain 3 used Westinghouse generators. The purpose? To kill a man with a machine bearing a competitor's name. Westinghouse personally funded $100,000 in legal fees to block the execution. The case reached the federal Supreme Court. The court deferred to state authority. Dismissed. The execution proceeded as scheduled. The first current ran 1,300 volts, 17 seconds. Doctors declared death. Kemmler groaned. He was still breathing. A loose generator belt. Insufficient current. Time needed to recharge. The second current ran 2,000 volts. 4 minutes. Skin burned. Smoke rose. 8 minutes after the switch was thrown, death was finally declared. After the execution, Westinghouse said, "An axe would have done better." But the scene was not about capital punishment. It was about a competitor's name being consumed through the act of killing. From this moment, the technology war was no longer engineering. It was an image war. Edison's side spread a new word through the press: to be Westinghoused, a coinage meaning death by electrocution. A 61-page pamphlet was printed and distributed to over 5,000 municipal officials. The argument: alternating current is an execution device you bring into your home. The strategy: turn a competitor's name into a synonym for death. That was the image war, but the real verdict came in numbers. The 1893 World's Columbian Exposition, Chicago. 690 acres, 27 million visitors expected. The greatest event on Earth. A contract was put to bid to build the first city in human history powered entirely by electricity. GE bid $1.8 million. The cost of DC copper wire plus additional power stations produced that figure. When the committee rejected it, GE cut to $554,000. That was the ceiling of its cost structure. It was the truth. Westinghouse bid $399,000. AC raised voltage through a single transformer. Thin wire covered the entire fairground. 12 generators were enough. Westinghouse won. Opening night. More than 100,000 bulbs lit the Chicago sky. The crowd saw light. Capital saw cost structure. What shone in Chicago that night was the triumph of alternating current. What was truly confirmed was the triumph of a scalable system. That was the market's verdict on direct current. The visitors did not know. Behind the spectacle, 250,000 replacement bulbs stood in reserve. Westinghouse had developed them independently to counter Edison's patent blockade. Emergency crews walked the grounds through the night, swapping out burned bulbs. That desperate effort was invisible. Act 3. The inventors were expelled. Now the story leaves the inventors' hands. Electricity begins to be rewritten, not in the language of technology, but of capital. April 15, 1892. J.P. Morgan merged Edison General Electric with Thomson Houston Electric. The new company's name was General Electric. No inventor's name was in it. The merger structure explained everything. Thomson Houston was valued at $18 million. Edison General Electric, $1.5 million, a 12-to-1 gap. Edison's name being erased from the company sign was not an emotional decision. It was a result of the ledger. Capital is loyal not to brands, but to cash flow. Edison received notice one day before the merger. He was pushed to an honorary seat on the board. He stepped away from the electricity business entirely. The man who made the first link was not inside the room when it closed. Westinghouse fell differently. The panic of 1907. Banks demanded repayment. Westinghouse had funded long-term infrastructure, projects like Niagara, with short-term loans. The maturities didn't match. There was no cash. Receivership. The creditors had been waiting. Creditors replaced management. 1910. Westinghouse was expelled from the board. 1911. All official ties to the company he founded were severed. The winner of the war was not Edison, not Tesla, not Westinghouse. Capital. Act 4. Standards became infrastructure. The end of the electricity war did not dissolve the chains. Electricity was no longer an invention. It had become an asset that generated dividends. At the center of that transition was Samuel Insull, Edison's former secretary. In 1892, he broke off independently, taking over Chicago Edison. For the next 30 years, he acquired mid-sized power companies and grew. Not an inventor, a manager, not technology, capital structure. He applied the logic of scale he'd learned from Edison to financial architecture. He sold utility shares to the middle class. He was the first to build a structure that sold utility equity to small investors. People's Capitalism, his slogan. 600,000 small shareholders connected to that structure. At its 1929 peak, the Insull empire spanned 32 states. It controlled 1/8 of all electricity produced in America. Its assets equaled 70% of the entire U.S. federal budget. In just 50 days, it had grown by $500 million. $7,000 added in value every minute. Insull and his inner circle personally invested less than $1 million. With that sum, they controlled $2.5 billion of public money. The company above controlled the one below. The one below controlled still more beneath it. The real money was small. The control compounded at every layer. October 1929. The New York Stock Exchange began to collapse. Insull's top holding company, Middle West Utilities, traded at $570 a share. By 1932, the same share was worth 12.5 cents. 99.75% had vanished. 600,000 small shareholders lost more than 90% of their principal in 1932. The structure that had proclaimed people's capitalism drove those same people into the streets. April 1932. The vast pyramid collapsed, unable to repay debts measured in the thousands of dollars. Insull fled to Greece. A bankruptcy receiver was appointed. Assets were traced. Assets flowed to the creditors. Bankers Trust of Manhattan took 18% of the new equity. First National Bank and Continental Illinois National Bank each absorbed 14%. 600,000 small shareholders received one new share for every 100 old shares held. The key had always been with those who held the bonds. In Britain, a different kind of bill arrived. By 1918, London operated with 10 separate frequencies and dozens of voltage grids. Cross a district boundary, and motors stopped. The punitive regulation of 1882 had returned, 36 years later, as a physical fragmentation the state would have to repair with vast public funds. The law designed to prevent monopoly had created a cost greater than monopoly itself. The Insull collapse produced regulation, the Public Utility Holding Company Act of 1935. Holding companies were barred from building pyramids beyond 2 levels. By 1948, holding companies were forced to divest $12 billion in assets. The The number of regulated subsidiaries fell from 1,983 to 303. One man's financial engineering had restructured the entire U.S. utility industry. 1938. Samuel Insull collapsed in a Paris metro station. His wallet held only a few francs. The man who had proclaimed people's capitalism vanished from history with empty pockets. The 600,000 shareholders he created had been pushed to the streets 6 years before him. Niagara Falls. The site where Westinghouse and Tesla built the world's first large-scale commercial AC power station in 1895. In 1961, the Robert Moses Niagara Power Plant was built nearby. Installed capacity, 2,525 megawatts. It remains the center of New York State's clean energy supply. Where Edison lost, alternating current was laid. That current divided the Earth into two rhythms. America, 60 hertz. Europe, 50 hertz. The dividing line traced back to the difference in generator rotation speeds between two companies in the 1880s. Not consensus, wreckage of a market war. Fukushima, 2011. Eastern Japan faced a power shortage. The West had surplus, yet the power could not move. East, 50 hertz. West, 60 hertz. The total capacity of the converter stations linking the two grids, 1 gigawatt. Tokyo entered rolling blackouts. The frequency divide made the post-accident power crisis more severe. Japan bore enormous additional fuel costs after its reactors went offline. The old grids division narrowed every path to relief. Even the Predator was eventually consumed. The GE that Morgan built was dismantled into 3 pieces in the 21st century. The chain spared no one, not even the last link. Edison's name was erased from the company. Westinghouse was expelled from the company he founded. Insull disappeared from Paris with empty pockets. The people vanished, but the structures they built did not. The first link of the chain was locked in Manhattan in 1882. Madness came. An elephant died. A condemned man burned for 8 minutes. Inventors fell. Capital liquidated. 600,000 were driven to the streets. The chain remained. Even now, the moment we flip a switch, the electricity inside the wall trembles at the frequency that era left behind. This is the world that greed built.